So welcome everyone to the Unlocking Critical Minds webinar, our final webinar of 2024. We're so happy to have you here joining us today and to be joined by our two guest speakers, Nicole Campbell and Daryl Tureen. Just a little housekeeping before we get going. As always, this session will be recorded and shared online and via email after. So by attending, you are consenting to this. A Q&A will take place at the end of the session. Just type your questions in the chat at any point during the webinar, and we will endeavor to answer as many as we can. This is a CPD webinar. You'll receive an email containing a link to a form. Fill out these details to get your certificate. Follow-up communications containing a recording and CPD certificate will be sent later this week. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Just quickly, a little bit about the day. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the day does, we turn the news into lessons. So our vision is for every young person to find their voice. We coach life's most important skills by using the real world as our teacher. Making lessons out of news gives young people knowledge, confidence, and agency to think and believe in themselves. So I'll be sharing a bit about the day's December offer. We have a special offer for everyone in attendance who is not a member already. Stick around till the end of the webinar to learn how to redeem that discount. So today's webinar, why we're all here, will offer practical examples and advice for teachers looking to embed critical thinking across the curriculum and introduce inquiry-led learning techniques to their students. And I'm so excited to introduce our guest speakers. First of all, I'm going to start with Nicole. Nicole Campbell is Senior Subject Lead of PSHE at Lillian Baylis Technology School in South London, where she specializes in mental health and well-being. With a passion for interdisciplinary learning and global citizenship, Nicole brings a wealth of knowledge and insight to discussions on critical thinking for all learners. Welcome, Nicole. And now over to Daryl. Daryl Tureen is Head of Inquiry-Based Learning at Blanchland College in Guernsey. He's the originator of FOSSIL. So FOSSIL stands for Framework of Skills for Inquiry Learning, and the FOSSIL Group. So before becoming a professionally qualified school librarian in 2003, he taught philosophy and theology. So welcome both of you. Before we start our webinars, we take a quick poll just to get a sense of what you're all facing in your classrooms. It helps us kind of contextualize what we're talking about during this webinar. So my team's going to put up the question in a moment. And the question is, for all of you, what's the biggest obstacle facing students when it comes to thinking critically? So we have a multiple choice questions. We have low attention spans from digital distractions, increased amount of misinformation, pressure to conform to certain opinions, limited exposure to diverse viewpoints, fear of making mistakes or being wrong, or something else, something more specific to you. Please let us know in the chat. We'd love to talk about it and explore it. Give everyone a moment to put their answers in. There we go. This is really interesting because we have a three-way tie. I don't think that's ever happened before. And that's a really interesting way to start this discussion today. So maybe as expected, low attention spans from digital distractions. Quarter of you said that, but another quarter of you said limited exposure to diverse viewpoints. And also 25% said fear of making mistakes or being wrong. So that's really interesting. Also, some other at 13%. So there you go. But I'm so excited. We're here today to really welcome and talk to our guests. And I'd love to start with you, Nicole, if that's okay, to get today's discussion going. I'd love to know, what are some of the obstacles facing students when it comes to thinking critically in your classroom? Over to you.
Thank you. So I've had 8 years of teaching in primary school, Matt, and I've been in secondary school for 3 years now. So I've really had a wide range of experience in terms of working with children from very young ages, such as 3 all the way to 18 years old. And I think for myself, when we discuss critical thinking, we often think about it as something we don't address until we're in further or higher education. And I think one of the obstacles first that we need to overcome is actually we need to start teaching this at a younger age. So that involves teaching children to question what they're told, finding the evidence for themselves and exploring other perspectives. And I think some of the obstacles of that are as some people put in the poll, the low attention spans, the distraction by the digital apps such as TikTok, they're getting their information from YouTube. There's a lot of misinformation going on. And I feel that one of the biggest obstacles we face as educators is that we're constantly combating that miseducation. And part of us teaching those skills is teaching children that they need to be questioning what they're hearing online. They need to be looking at different perspectives and making sure their sources are reliable. And I think that even means questioning the sources we're told are reliable. So, for example, if we've got different news outlets, we need to teach children how to look at all different types of news outlets and then come to their own conclusions. But yeah, definitely one of the biggest barriers are the digital distractions. Another thing is the discernment, understanding, if they're watching something online, they don't just take it as truth. They need to be questioning it constantly. And some of the misinformation is not only coming from the media messages, it's also coming from their own families, maybe their communities/cultures. And it's about them obviously opening up their perspectives and looking at it from other points of view. I feel like it's important because the world's really changing fast, and the students are facing a lot of challenges, especially in terms of their mental health. So it's critical that we think about these obstacles as challenges in terms of how they're living their life and the skills we want them to have for life.
Absolutely. And when you become a teacher, there's the teaching too. So you've just listed all these obstacles, and it's incredible what's on a teacher's plate in 2024. And I think what's really interesting about what you said is that's today. It's still evolving, changing. So it's this constant, obstacle challenge that educators are looking to meet and overcome, and with great results for the students, of course. So that's really great, Nicole. And maybe over to you, Daryl. I mentioned to everyone as we began that you are the founder of this fossil framework, and this inquiry-led learning is something you created. Over to you to really just describe it. We're really curious to hear more.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to talk through the cycle, just so that everybody has an idea of where I'm coming from. And just in relation to that, I would have answered the question. So I would have answered the question that from my experience, children aren't given an opportunity to think and to really be encouraged to think for themselves, to think independently and to think for themselves. So if we could go through to the first slide. Thank you. Yes. So that's really where this comes in. Fossil is an instructional model of the process of learning through inquiry, which is based on the work of my colleague in America, Barbara Stripling, who is Professor Emerita at Syracuse University. The particular model of the framework that we're looking at here has condensed descriptions of the stages, and that was developed specifically for use in primary school, although it works perfectly well in secondary school. For our keynote address at the UK School Library Association conference in 2021, Barbara and I defined inquiry as a stance of wonder and puzzlement that gives rise to a dynamic process of coming to know and understand the world and ourselves in it as the basis for responsible participation in community. And it's really out of that formulation of the definition of inquiry that I got involved and helped frame the 6 steps to discovery in terms of these stages of the inquiry process. So inquiry then is a stance and an iterative learning process that is centered on an engaged and empowered inquirer, which is reflected by that image in the center. The process starts with connect because the questions that arise out of a sense of wonder and puzzlement are always in response to something. So instructionally, our task here is to engage students intellectually and emotionally in the process of learning, which they must do if real learning is to happen. If students have questions that they are genuinely interested in answering, then they are less likely to cheat. And these questions further serve to guide students through the investigation, which we'll look at in greater detail in a minute. So while investigate is concerned with making sense of information, construct is concerned with finding meaning in that information. And this is where real learning occurs, as opposed to mere memorization of information and reproduction in tests, which really, unfortunately, is such a large emphasis in school today, by and large. Express requires students to be able to share their learning, not just information, appropriately, effectively, and ethically, which is where citing and referencing comes in, less as a technical skill and more as an academic one, even though there is a technical dimension to that. And then if students are thoughtfully and passionately engaged in their learning, reflecting on the process and outcome of their learning comes naturally. And then if you wouldn't mind just going on to the next slide, Matt. So an important feature of FOSSIL is the identification of the skill sets that enable each stage in the process. And this adds a helpful layer of detail and complexity to the process and is in a step towards the underlying framework of PK to 12 or reception to year 13 skills and the associated graphic organizers. The kinds of critical thinking skills required in the process of learning from information become much clearer at this level, and this really facilitates planning for and mapping the acquisition of these skills in collaboration with colleagues in other subjects and across year groups. And then we'll just look at one of these stages and the kinds of skills involved in slightly more detail, and then I'm done with my introduction. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So while the skill sets facilitate planning and collaboration amongst teachers, the icons that we've developed for heroic inquiry at Blanchland College for each of the stages facilitate teaching and learning through inquiry. By way of illustration, the investigate icon, which we're looking at here, is particularly apt given our focus here on critical thinking. So you'll see here that this is also the expanded description of the investigate stage, discerning the reliability of available sources and using them appropriately and effectively. The meaning of which is reflected in the icon. So given the classical emphasis of the hero's journey at Blanchland College, the stages of which are aligned to the stages in the heroic inquiry process, the two monsters here represent Scylla and Charybdis. One monster represents the threat of too much information, what David Foster Wallace terms total noise, the growing tsunami of available fact, context, and perspective that threatens to drag us under and drown us. The other monster represents the overwhelming maelstrom of mis, dis, and malinformation. The heroic inquirer must both fend off and navigate through this information disorder if sense is to be made and meaning to be found. This iconic representation of the heroic inquirer and the heroic inquiry stance and process has proven to be of enormous instructional value. And as a consequence, in the spirit of the FOSSIL group, which is free to join and freely shares in each other's work, we are currently working on a heroic inquiry cycle reimagined for a contemporary setting that we will introduce and share freely during the inaugural FOSSIL Symposium on Saturday, the 8th of February, if anybody else would find this useful for teaching and learning purposes.
That's great. That's really, this iconography is interesting to me because there is something so brave and courageous for a young person to seek information in a way that, as you describe it, with the FOSSIL network. So it's this really interesting way of saying, be brave, ask questions. And I think that's kind of messaging that lands with young people because it can be very scary. Obviously, learning and school. So that's really interesting. And I think the other thing I was really struck by was a stance of wonder and puzzlement, if I'm quoting that correctly.
Yes.
And I think that's such a memorable way of thinking. Yeah, that's why I'm asking a question, because I'm in wonder, I'm puzzled. And I think that's a really interesting place to start, in tandem with this idea of being brave about it. So that's really interesting. We're going to come back. I think there's some questions already coming about in the chat, but this has given us a lot to think about. And then if I can go back to you, Nicole, just to keep the conversation going. So we've kind of looked at this fossil framework. Could you tell me a little bit how you use your 6 steps framework, which is a framework on the day, to structure rich discussions in the classroom? We'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Okay, as a PSHE teacher, I feel that because I teach lessons from years 7 to 13, it's easier for me to implement the day's resources into my lessons, because I can spend as much time or as little time as I want on these types of things. Whereas teachers that have got a strict curriculum to keep to, some schools don't have a timetable PSHE or citizenship lesson, so they might wonder how they can fit it in. So personally, if I didn't have those lessons to utilize these resources, I would definitely look at fitting them into form time activities. You can definitely find cross-curricular links within some of these articles where you can implement them into your subjects if you're a secondary teacher. At primary level, you definitely want to be using it in your reading for non-fiction work. I think it will lend greatly. So as an example, I've got an article from this week, just showing it here. Using an article like this, I would get my students to use a yellow and blue pen, go through the article, highlight in blue the facts from the article that they deem as facts, and in yellow, highlight all the parts what they think are opinions. And then, if you don't mind, Matt, go into the part of the website that shows those articles.
Perfect. Yes.
Thank you so much. So at this point, as a teacher, if I approach the website like this, I'm going to the top, because what I want to do first is print the article for my students, if I'm not using it in digital format. So when I press print, if you scroll right to the bottom for me, it includes the 6 steps within the article. So once we've gone through the highlight and the facts and opinions, we then can work on the 6 steps. It's all there for me. I can print that on a double-sided sheet, so every student in the class can get their own copy. And once they've got that copy, we then go through whole class reading, and then that's when they highlight in blue and yellow the facts versus the opinions. At that point, we'll use the worksheet that goes with the article. And the worksheet looks like this. So using their highlighted parts, the blue and the yellow, they've already differentiated the differences that they think are facts and opinions. And before we go on to the worksheet, we'll discuss as a class what are the facts and opinions, how do we know the difference between the two? And that's when we get some really good conversation going, and they're able to know that they're doing the right thing for this bit. So at this part, they're getting one of the blues and putting it in the facts, one of the yellows and putting it in the opinions, and then they get a chance to formulate their own opinion, which is great, because that's what we want them to do. Most times students don't, once we've spoken about both sides of the argument, we always talk about the grey areas, because sometimes their opinions don't fit into either or. So we then discuss opinions that fit on both sides of the fence, and the fact that you can have your own perspective, and that's fine. Some people say, and other people say, they normally will just get 2 opposing views from the article, and just before they write that bit, we do discuss what are opposing views, how do we know they're opposing, and then they'll take quotes from the article and put it on either side, which is great. Sometimes we look at the glossary from the sheet itself, because it includes a glossary with the 6 steps, and they would maybe just copy some of the words they've learned today, where some of them would choose words in the article they've never come across, and then they'll write their own different definitions using their dictionaries, which is great as well, because then they're just extending their vocabularies and finding words they didn't know before. And again, the critical literacy questions are brilliant, because we're just asking these questions to make sure they understand the facts from the story, which leads us really nicely to the 6 steps. If we can go back to the article. So at the bottom of the article, you'd find the 6 steps. Sorry, that's my 5th period pick.
Okay, you're in a school.
It's love it. So that just reminds me of what time it is. So the 6 steps of discovery are great, because as Darryl said, we're working similarly to the Fossil framework, where we're taking it step by step. And most teachers might be wondering, like, how on earth will I find all the time to work through all of this? I think it's about understanding that it's not all or nothing. I believe that some of this you could set for home learning. Some of this you might want to grab one or two and use it for your form time. You might want to do it across the week. So maybe break the steps up and do a little bit each day would work really nicely. The connect part's the most important part. I think we need to let children know, like, the relevance of these articles in their life. So part of the critical thinking is thinking, well, this is what the article's saying. How does this connect to my life? How do I formulate my own opinions? And again, that leads to the wonder. What questions does this article make you have? So when we did this article today, some of the students, they were learning about, should we increase life skills in schools? As much as we focus on academic subjects, should we focus more on children's resilience, their happiness, their well-being? And most students said they would like to see what other schools around the world are doing, schools that really do focus on life skills. What are their academic results like? So those types of questions lend well, because then what we're doing is we're looking at global citizenship, wondering how other people do things, and do they still get great results? And if that's the case, could we not model that and maybe introduce that into our education system? So it was getting that wonder really going. And again, the investigation part, looking at statistics that we're not always told. So in this particular study, 54% of parents said they wanted schools to focus more on teaching their children life skills, whereas 37% wanted the academic focus. But then it was like, what about the remaining percentage? What did those parents think? Or what do you think that they would have said? So then we discussed sometimes the statistics that are not there, and how can we investigate finding out what those statistics are saying, which lends well to the last three parts of the steps. The constructing, it's about getting the children to create. If you're going to add something to this curriculum for you, what would it be? Which subject do you think should be replaced? Some of them today said they wanted to learn more about managing financing in maths. They wanted to learn about budgeting skills, investments, ways that they can manage their money well as adults, instead of perhaps a subject like trigonometry, which may be useful for some careers. But again, they wanted something that was more relevant to their futures. And that's what most of them said in the construct part. In the express part, it's more about working in groups and coming up with suggestions. So how can we improve things? Again, that's putting the onus on the students, getting them to create their own curriculums. Even though we can't make it happen, it was still nice for them to express themselves and say what it is they would like, and reflecting on maybe imagining a school where that they are in control, you know, literally they're deciding what they do. And we found a school that does that. The children come in the morning and they decide what they're learning that day. And we watched that on YouTube, and that was quite fascinating, the fact that some schools around the world do give children the autonomy to decide what they're learning on that day.
That's really interesting. Nicole, there's so many points I want to jump in on, especially this idea of challenging the statistics that aren't there. When you're doing that with your students, that is, right, honing media literacy, because no media publication might capture everything. But if students go out into the world saying, actually, that's missing, it could have been there, then, you know, students are increasing their media literacy. So I really love that idea. And I think, yeah, something you said about real life skills in today's article in the day is this idea of like, hey, nothing against trigonometry, but like, I'm still waiting to use that as well. So these ideas of real life skills and their value to young people in 2024 is so rich and valuable, because young people just want to know they have that roadmap, you know, whether in school or right after. So no, that's really great. Thank you for sharing how you do it. It's such fabulous pedagogy, this idea of the worksheet and putting it all together. And actually, while I have you, Nicole, I think a question's already come in. We can really just dive into the Q&A because it's lighting up in there. There's a couple questions, and one for you too, Daryl. A lot of students are over-reliant on memorizing rather than actually understanding a text. Do you have any insights or advice on what you would do with someone who's not maybe getting deep, critically thinking about something, but rather just memorizing as a way of learning?
If it's possible, Matt, could you just quickly go back to the skill sets slide?
I can. Yes, right here. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Well, while you're doing that, because the whole reason why we developed the skill set slide is that even just getting a sense for the process in terms of the stages, so that learning is a process. There are distinct stages in that process. That those stages require certain skills, but having a sense of what those skills are is really important.
Yes.
And then once we know what those skill sets are, so if you could go into that one, yes. So just to pick up on what Nicole was saying, is this shift from making sense of information, so making sense of what other people are saying, and then constructing meaning of that for myself. So what does this then mean to me? So if you just have a look at the skill sets, for example, in Investigate, because I'm thinking some people may not have been able to read that. So different types and sources and organization of information, navigation and search strategies, evaluation, selection, curation, and use of multiple sources, and then crucially, evaluation and selection of evidence within sources. And I think that's what's one of the things that's great about the way that the day approaches the news. Perspectives, point of view, strategies to make sense of information, capturing information, and thinking or note taking. Now, that helps us to understand what is going on Investigate, and that Investigate is actually quite a complex, it's quite a complex complex of skills. And then on top of that, we need to bear in mind that unless we are developing these skills systematically and progressively all the way through school, we can't then be surprised when children can't do certain of these things higher up when the stakes are higher. So in answer to answer your question, I think while it would be great to enable children to step through a whole cycle, whenever we are encouraging a sense of wonder and puzzlement, and whenever we are giving students an opportunity to wrestle with and make sense of, and then to express what they've learned, especially if we've taken the time during Construct to engage them intellectually and emotionally so that they really care about the answers to the questions that they have. And that takes time, and it takes a concerted effort. And I'm hoping really that some of the changes that appear to be taking place in education at the moment will make that conversation easier to have and more urgent to have.
That's really interesting. No, that's great. And I think, going back to you, Nicole, there's a question about the 6 steps from Matthew Rose that kind of is in tandem again in chorus with what we're talking about with Daryl. It's this, what's the ideal amount of time, class time necessary to incorporate those 6 steps into a lesson? And this comes up a lot. Like, how can you adapt it into a lesson, to a class time when you have so and so amount of time? Do you have any kind of takeaways that the teachers could have regarding that?
So from my perspective, Barbara and I spoke at Real World Learning Live, which the day arranged. We spoke in 2021. So I have posted a link to the fossil group discussion on that. And what Barbara and I did for that presentation was to think about what is the shortest amount of time to step students meaningfully through all 6 steps. So we tried to imagine what the absolute shortest amount of time would be. And then we took that very same lesson and we then imagined what that might look like if we were able to spend an extended amount of time on that. So I have posted that link into the chat. That's a link to the presentation. And then Barbara and I also, following that, had a discussion, an extended discussion about the presentation, and the link to that discussion is also in that link.
That's all. That's really great. Thank you for posting that. And then everyone, we can also share that in our comms tomorrow as well. Nicole, did you want to add anything to that in terms of what you're doing in the classroom and adapting? And it's a conversation that comes up anytime I'm talking to someone about the day. You can do 1 or 2, you could do all 6. It's what the class needs and what specific skill set needs to be really drawn out in that moment. I'd love to know anything that you could provide.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on whether you're looking at it from a primary or secondary perspective. I'll say it from a primary perspective. When you're with a class every day, Monday to Friday, and you get that time in the morning to maybe do your reading work or your literacy work, you will have that time to maybe use those 5 days to break these steps up, maybe 1 or 2 a day. So you don't want to feel like you're rushing this type of inquiry. You want the students to maybe do it in steps, or you could do it tailored to their abilities as well. You may have students that are more like gifted or more able in reading. They may be the ones that do the express and reflect parts. They might have a deeper understanding of the article itself, and you want to extend them and challenge them as well. You also want to challenge your ones that are struggling readers as well. You want to make sure that they are connecting, they've got that wonder, but also the investigation bit would be really important for them. So you could differentiate it according to groups. You could do it all together as one whole class. The person asks, what's the ideal amount of class time? I think it all depends on how long you devote to reading. When I was teaching primary, we only had like 30 minutes. And again, I don't think this is something you should rush through. So maybe you could break it apart and split it between your week and just work on that one article for the week would be great. At secondary level, I think that form time, again, isn't enough time to race through these. I feel that literacy or English teachers could use these really well for starter activities in their lesson. You might want to break it up in your form times, or you might want to access it as home learning. I'm a firm believer in giving the children projects. So I believe that we should be turning towards a more interdisciplinary learning style where we give them projects for them to lead their own inquiries and come up with their own questions. So something like this could be done as a term time project, something they have to submit at the end of a certain time, even if it's something they do in their own time. I do believe we've got a lot of screen time at the moment. So a lot of the homework that we set means that they've got more access to screens than ever. In terms of this, we could give them this work in terms of doing surveys, finding out facts. They could be asking people that are parents these questions themselves, coming up with their own statistics. You could really make this your own, and I feel that, yeah, not all of it could be done in class, but if you're limited on time, just try to be creative with maybe the ways that they go about answering these questions.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think we're going to go right through all our questions as they come in terms of where the day is positioned to help people. It's across schools, but we're also situated across other learning centers, special units, prisons. And this actually comes from the chat. So thank you so much from the audience. This person has shared, I work in offender learning across various prisons where learners struggle to engage with critical thinking, inquiry-led learning, as they have had such poor educational experiences and a lack of enthusiasm and confidence. Could both of you provide any advice to how someone could use the day or engage with this question? Because it's a wonderful
one. Would you like to go first, or should I, Nicole?
I'll go first. I'll be really quick, I promise.
We have plenty of time.
I feel that in that type of setting, you really can take your time. You really want to know what the ability of the students are. So you'd want to be listening to them reading aloud. With the day, you could go through all of the topics, choose ones that are meaningful to them. So you want to look at material that they find interesting. I would start there. and then go through the article together, hearing their opinions, have debates and discussions that really brings critical thinking alive. So I think for the engagement, the first thing would be to find out what they're interested in, what type of topics, what do they want to know more about, and start there.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good way in. Daryl, over to you.
So I think the point. So a major revelation for me was that inquiry is a fundamental human response to reality. So it is a response to the world that we find ourselves in. So whether we recognize that or not, and whether we formalize the stages in the response or not, life is an inquiry process. It's making sense of the world that we find ourselves in, attaching meaning to that, and then acting on it. So one of the things that really struck me, and this is less a comment on individuals than it is on the education system, but Bertrand Russell in 1922 in Free Thought and Propaganda wrote that our education system, by and large, turns children out of schools who can read and write, but who aren't able to form an independent opinion. And then they are assailed through the rest of their lives by people who are presenting them with absurd propositions. Some of which are actually wrong, and some of which are actually harmful. So I think if we take a step back from an inquiry being a way to learn content, subject content in school, hopefully in an interdisciplinary way, as Nicole said, because there are many points of contact and collaboration. But if our starting point is that inquiry is a fundamental response to the world that we find ourselves in, what life lessons can we learn from the things that we've experienced and have happened to us? And how do we reflect on that and act differently in response to those lessons that we've learned? Because that is what happens in the investigate stage. Is learning from information. That information can come from firsthand experience, or it can come from reading about what somebody else has discovered through firsthand experience, or even what somebody else has speculated about.
That's really interesting. And these questions are really kind of following up on each other in interesting ways. To that point about inquiry, S. Johnson in the audience has asked and commented, no one is too old to wonder, be puzzled, or inquire into topics otherwise foreign to us at the start of the process. Do either of you agree with this statement? And the question is critical thinking a lifelong skill? Nicole, do you want to jump in on that one? Or yeah.
Definitely. I love learning, and I have done since I was a child. And I guess sometimes when we have always been like this, we don't ever understand how it feels for children that don't love learning. For instance, reading, I just love it. So when children say they don't like reading, it's like my brain can't fathom it. How can you not like it? So I guess it's about us building that empathy as teachers. Our love for learning or being educated, sometimes we don't always put ourselves in the shoes of students that don't like it. And I guess it's about finding that way in, that entry point where we find out, well, what do they like, So the question was, is it a lifelong skill? Of course it is. I think life is like a school. And I think when students see beyond exams and see life as a whole as just a learning journey, that's when they realize we never stop asking questions. And I believe that is so true. So if I ask a question in class and I don't know the answer, I'll just look it up there and then. So we learn something together. Or sometimes a student teaches me something and I tell them like, wow, I never knew that. And you just taught me something new. So I think it's important that we keep ourselves open to that as well, so that students understand that just because we're teachers, it doesn't mean we know everything. And I think it's important. Sometimes I have children challenging me. I don't agree with that, miss. And then they'll say why. or they'll question something that I'm teaching. I say, yeah, brilliant. I like when you do that. You challenge me really well. That got me thinking. So when they do that, it makes my job more rewarding, I would say, because it makes me realize I'm still a student on this journey, and sometimes they're the teachers as well.
That's incredible. The flexibility of learning. Exactly. Like we can look it up together. Why should learning stop when we leave school? And I know when I was a student, you sometimes think it reaches a moment where it ends. And then as we get into the thick of life, we realize it's every day to the end. I couldn't agree with you more. Nicole. Daryl, we have another question. They are coming thick and fast, and we love it like this. For you, in India, the students struggle through only, this is from someone in the audience, in India, the students struggle through only the academic subjects as their focus is only towards that. How do I go about that and deal with the extra reading involved? Do you have any comments on that one from that?
So again, the transition is from a fundamental human response to reality. And either we learn everything the hard way by doing it ourselves, or we learn from other people who have gone before us. So I think that is one of the things that sets us apart, sets human beings apart, is this ability to record experience and to learn from experience in the record. We don't have to figure it all out ourselves. We don't have to do it all ourselves. So inquiry is what has produced the bodies of knowledge of the various academic disciplines or subjects. So all of what we know in history, all of what we know in geography, all of what we know in the various sciences, that knowledge is the result of inquiry over a period of time. So in school, the challenge that we're always facing, because we place such an emphasis on content, and we've got such a narrow view of what learning is and what success is, that the most efficient way to get through a lot of information or potential knowledge in a subject is to tell it, and to memorize it and to reproduce it. So if that's what we've reduced learning to, then we're always going to struggle. However, we can approach that body of knowledge in a spirit of wonder and puzzlement and through the process of inquiry. Now, that's not going to be easy, and it will involve a struggle, but we've got ample evidence of where even in a GCSE and A-level content-heavy exam-focused system, it is possible to frame teaching and learning through inquiry. So we develop an inquiry stance, process, and skills while acquiring the knowledge that is necessary to pass the test or exam at the end of the day. So that is possible, but it does require conversations, collaboration, time, and effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a theme that's coming across in today's discussion from everyone is this idea of time and temporality and things, inquiry-led thinking and critical thinking can spread across a class. It can, ooze into the evening discussion. It can come back the next day. And I think that's the idea, is this idea, it's an opening up of curiosity that doesn't always have a neat bookend to when it finishes. So I'm really struck by both what you and Nicole say, this idea of, coming back to something, looking at it from different ways. And to that point, for Nicole, this is from Matthew Rose in the audience. There's a section in the day that you showed us where it's called Some People Say, Dive in Deeper, Become an Expert. It's right for the 6 steps of discovery when we were scrolling down on the worksheet and on the website. Can you share how you incorporate that into the classroom, into your discussions around an article. Oh, I think you're on mute. I think maybe.
Definitely, thank you. So, some people say on the articles you'll be given, for instance, 2 quotes, and I think at that point the students might write, they can write on their sheet 2 opposing views from those 2 quotes, and then what you want them to be thinking about is which quote do you agree with, and usually at that point they'll say, well, I agree with both of them or neither, and then they'll give their reasons why. So usually, for instance, this one says, some people say education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. And then the other one says education is the best weapon we have to fight poverty, ignorance, and terrorism. And at that point, the students know are they 2 opposing views? The children can agree. And at that point, you can look at, well, how are these 2 views the same? How are they different? So you can get lots of questions out of the some people say. Also, you can ask them, what do you think? So can you come up with your own quote about education is brilliant? Some people say, and this is awful, I'm in inner city London, so I don't know students' way of thinking elsewhere, but I've heard some students say education is useless. I just want to go to work now. I want to make money now. They don't see the value of education. And a child that says education is useless, what's the point? That's their quote. So if they say something like that, I want them to explain, tell me why, because that's what they think. So again, you don't want to tell children they're wrong in the way that they think. You want to explore why they think that. And again, that's all part of education, getting them to change their perspectives based on the fact that education does have value, but they see that as my opinion. And I guess education is also about changing minds, you know. I had a student today say to me, oh, I don't need a revision plan. The student's in year 11. They said, I'm just going to be random and just study when I want. And I said, what do you spend most of your time doing? They said, I spend 5 hours a day on TikTok and Snapchat. And I thought, okay, well, that's 5 hours you're not revising. So I thought, you're going to get random results if you behave that way. And they said, well, that's what I believe in. I don't believe you need to revise to get good results. And again, that's what that student believes. But by the end of that lesson, the student left my room with a revision plan, because I said, if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. And I changed that student's perspective in 1 hour. So again, education that's part of it as well, is changing maybe what we see as a perspective that isn't great into letting them think from another way. So I'm just using that as an example. So talking about diving deeper, you want them to start thinking deeper in terms of, well, here's some more articles that you can go and read. And again, that might be at a greater depth level. Some students might be ready to do more reading. That article, that comment about in India, you know, the students are seeing this as extra reading, they're struggling with the academic subjects. I guess if we look at it as extra reading, our students might see it as a chore. So we want to integrate it in a really smart way, so they don't even know that they're learning. So again, I would urge you to get material that they're really interested in. And in that way, when you're diving in deeper, they want to read it because it's something that stimulates their interest. So that's kind of where you need to be with it.
Absolutely. When you can meet a student on their terms and what they find valuable and ask them to go down that rabbit hole of inquiry-led, questioning and reading and understanding, that's where, the magic happens. Back to the student that you mentioned spending 5 hours on TikTok, I think, we were talking about value, and this student was very clear. I see a value in that. And it made me think of something we do here at the Day, which is called the Global Young Journalist Award. And what we're doing here is asking young people from around the world, from any school in the world, to produce some content. And it can be in the form of a video, like the student is looking at TikTok. It can be a picture. It can be the written word. It can be a podcast, so something oral. And I think it's really exciting when young people, see themselves as content creators, influencers, and really have that global stage that Global Young Journalist Award provides. So I think my team can put a link into the chat about that. But in this sense, we can see all these ways that we can put some of the takeaways and valuable tools that you've both given us, and students can actually run with it and find a way to find their voice. So that's really interesting. We have another question from the audience. And the question is, how do you ensure inquiry-led strategies are inclusive and effective for all students with different abilities from different backgrounds? That's open to anybody who'd like to jump in.
So from our perspective, so no model of the inquiry process is perfect, because they have strengths and weaknesses. But I think one of the things that we worked very hard on, which is why the fossil inquiry cycle has that fossil head in the center, because that reminds us that even though we are interested in the inquiry stance and process, at the end of the day, it's all about developing engaged and empowered inquirers. So in that sense, it's genuinely, and I think not unhealthily, student-centered. So the whole point about inquiry, and that is clear from the literature, is that if you have designed an inquiry well, or elements of inquiry, and that is supported well, children find their own way into and through. And because we aren't trying to tell everybody exactly what it is that they need to know, which is not to say that that inquiry isn't directed at important content, but what we are doing is we're providing a structured and scaffolded way for students to access that content increasingly independently. And that means, so I teach all of year 9. I have them for 1 lesson a week and 1 homework a week to teach signature work inquiry skills. And that is directed at something related to 1 or more of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, some of those students require very, very little input from me in order to teach themselves about the topic that they've chosen. And I am much more hands-off with them. But there are other students who find that much more challenging. And what that approach does do is it frees me up in that lesson to spend more time with those students who need more help, without completely abandoning those students who need less help.
Perfect. No, that's great. Nicole, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on that as well, the same question, and maybe add a second one about strategies teachers can use to engage students who may feel uncomfortable with open-ended, often challenging discussions. But of course, also the question that Daryl just answered about how to make learning more inclusive. Happy to, if you want to amalgamate your answer to both or take one at a time, that'd be amazing.
Yes, so some of the ways we approach teaching critical thinking in my sessions are making the environment feel safe. So I feel that students need to feel respected, and they need to feel safe to express their feelings and know that they're not going to get any judgment in the classroom. So usually what I'll do is set those ground rules just so that everyone understands that we're treating each other respectfully, and so they feel comfortable to challenge one another as well. So I think debates, students nowadays really like to debate, and they like current topics or issues that affect them in the world. They're really interested in what's going on in the world. So I feel like that's a great place to start, is talk about a subject that they're going to be really interested in. And usually lately I've been noticing they're more interested in politics, the things that are going on with our presidents or prime ministers. They're interested in climate change. They're interested in technology or the AI, how that's going to change for the future. They want to know about what are the future jobs going to be. And I feel that when we spark that interest and we talk about something that they really are into, that's how we really can just explode those critical thinking skills. That's what I've noticed lately. And also using real life scenarios, you know, like what would you do in that situation? And we need to know our students well. So for instance, with the demographics that I work within, I work in a borough called Lambeth in London, and Lambeth's got its specific social issues. I'd really urge teachers to understand what's going on a borough-wide level in their borough. What are the issues? What are the borough's targets? And really tailor your sessions to focus on those students' needs. I think it's really important. So it's really relevant to them. And then obviously your whole school improvement plan, you want to make sure that you're feeding into that as well. So I would say that's why I don't think a PSHE is one size fits all for this type of learning. I feel that we need to know our students really, really well, because what matters to one school, the students in that school might not matter to the school down the road. So you need to understand the demographics really well. And also, like I said, analyze the media messages, get them to constantly look, spot the fake news, you know, these types of things are what students like. As soon as I put up emojis or pictures of apps, they get all excited, all the eyes up to the board, you know. So although we don't want them on the screens that much, that is a way in, really, discussing what's going on online. Yeah, you just got to find what they're interested in, find that way in.
And Nicole, to your point, like we're so interested in what students are feeling and thinking across the world. We've introduced a section called Student Voices that you can find in our resource section. And we've been so excited to see students coming forward, finding their voice, talking about what's, to your point, what's important to them specifically, and how students then cannot, you talked about feeling safe, and students can now realize that something they're facing is faced by another student somewhere across the world, across the city. And it's been really valuable having that section, and that section continues to grow. Moreover, when a student writes, our editors will get in touch with them, help them revise so they can see what that process is like in the writing process, and get it to a place where it can be published on the day for others to read across the world. So I'm really glad you brought up that point, because it really reminded me of this new section that we have, Student Voices. Daryl, over to you. We have a question from the audience. Are there any subjects where you found inquiry-led learning to be more challenging to implement than others? So like, what areas of the curriculum can the fossil framework slot more easily into versus others? Or is it universal? Can it be used across any subject area?
So it's very interesting, because I think that depends on where you are. So say, for example, in the UK, we always found that it was easier to collaborate with colleagues in, for example, English, history, geography, religious studies. It was easier to do that. We quite often struggled with colleagues in science, colleagues in maths, colleagues in modern and ancient languages. However, in other countries, strangely, they seem to struggle with subjects where we found it relatively easy in, and some of the most extraordinary inquiry-based learning was happening in the sciences and maths. And very interestingly, at Blanchland, we are doing some extraordinary work with the mathematics department, particularly in year 7, 8, and 9. And those inquiries are very creative and are unfolding in a very interesting and natural way. So I think all subjects lend themselves to an inquiry-based approach to teaching and learning, but it seems where that is easier seems to depend on the country, and possibly also even the school and individual colleagues within that school.
Well, no, that's great. And just to wrap up, Nicole, a question for you. We're coming to the close of the webinar in terms of time, but have you ever faced a situation in your classroom where there's been a debate and students have made fun of each other in some way, and this teacher in the audience is curious, how did you handle it?
Yes, this happened last week, actually. With my debates, what I normally do is I get 3 on each side. So I'll give them the topic. I say, we get the students to want for and against, and they go to the front. And what that means is that the students are willingly going to the front to make that debate. And if the audience wants to participate, they can raise their hand. If there's a rebuttal, we have that going on. So we have the backwards and forwards. So they introduce their arguments one at a time until both sides have done all 3 arguments, which is really nice. The other day I had a student laughing at one of the people, and then the boy said, you know, I don't want to do this anymore, I feel a bit uncomfortable. So I stepped outside of him. He told me the situation. He told me there was a student that kept sniggering every time he spoke. And I noticed that that student doesn't really take part in the debate. So it was almost like that student's been very critical of him, but they weren't confident enough to even get up there and do that themselves. So when I came back in, I just made it clear to everybody that it's just not acceptable to knock someone's confidence. And I guess for me, respect is the boundary here. When you start a session like that, you need to lay those ground rules about the respect for each other. And even when we don't agree with each other, we're going to respectfully disagree. We're not going to make people feel small or like their idea is silly. We're going to respect each other. So again, respect is the boundary there. And I would definitely just set those lines and make them really, really clear. And if that does happen, I normally would just address it and say, we don't do that here. There's no space for that here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of goes back to what everyone said, to this consensus of inquiry-led learning to be done within a supportive environment, and how important, using your words, Nicole, how that boundary is set to ensure that, because otherwise, where do we go? I think we could have talked forever. It's 5 o'clock here in the UK, and it's safe to say, I'll say this, I wish both you, Nicole, and Daryl had been my teacher a million years ago, which was a very long time ago, because I think it would have been very valuable having some of these tools and really great takeaways at that point in my life. So thank you for being our experts today, Nicole and Daryl. All your advice, all your guidance, all those takeaways I just mentioned from the session. And another round of thanks to the audience. You kept us busy. This has been one of the liveliest chats we've ever had. If we had a little bit more time, we'd be speaking for a bit more. So thank you so much for all those great, rich questions. Another reminder of our offer at the day: we'll give you a free upgrade from our secondary to all through package if you become a member before the 20th of December. That'll save you around £250 on this cross-curricular resource. It includes all of the features of the day that Nicole described in detail so well, like our 6 steps mentioned earlier and throughout this webinar. So fill out that form if you're interested in that. And it goes without saying, if you'd like a private chat with me for 30 minutes to go over everything about the day, I'm happy to do it. And I have 2 colleagues here at the day who'd be happy to do it with you as well. So just send us a private message and we'd be happy to set that up. Well, I wish everyone a wonderful evening, and thank you again for being here today for this webinar, and happy holidays. And I wish everyone a happy new year, because this is the last one of the year, and we'll see you at some point in 2025.
Super.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.